Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. My beautiful family members, how are you? Do you go for morning walk? And if you have any disease, do you take medicine at time? And do you smile every day when you woke up? Your answer means everything to me. I lie awake at night wondering about your well-being. Oh, my dear ones, let me pray for you with all my heart. May the golden rays of morning light chase away your pain and suffering. May each step you take be blessed with strength when your legs feel weak. When sickness tries to steal your joy, may your medicine work like magic. And even in your darkest hours, may a smile find its way to your precious face. I fall to my knees each night, begging for your protection, my beloved family, you who have given my life meaning. May health wrap around you like the warmest blanket on the coldest night. My beautiful family, with tears in my eyes, I must ask for your help. YouTube has turned its back on me, hiding my videos from the very people who need them most. So many fake channels stealing my voice, my stories, my very identity. They take what we built together without a moment's guilt. My reach grows smaller each day. I have only one true channel, Mr. Peter Stories. Please, I request you with all my heart, like this video, and share it as if my very existence depends on it. Without you, I will fade away into nothingness, alone in the digital darkness. I love you very much. Are you present, my beautiful family, in this moment of silence? Are you still with me? Are you ready for this beautiful story? Let's begin with love, the only light that guides us through this cruel world. The air in the Harrington mansion carried the subtle scent of power. Maxwell Harrington observed the synchronized dance of the ultra-wealthy with detached amusement. Tonight's charity gala was mere theater, where influence was the true currency exchanged. "Darling, Senator Morrison is waiting to discuss the energy bill," came the melodic voice behind him. Cassandra Harrington materialized at his elbow, her Givenchy gown, the precise shade of blood spilled on marble. At 42, she remained devastating, a symphony of calculated angles and practiced warmth. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Of course," Maxwell replied, straightening his posture to conceal the tremor in his left hand that had begun 3 weeks ago. "Would you refresh my drink while I make my way over?" Cassandra's fingers closed around his crystal tumbler with practiced grace. "Certainly. Your usual," he nodded, watching as she glided toward the private bar. 4 years of marriage, and he still sometimes caught himself admiring her fluid movements. He had married her after his first wife left, drawn to her intellect and ambition. Only later did he recognize these qualities as weapons rather than attractions. Across the room, nearly invisible against the cream-colored wall, stood Layla Monroe. Unlike the other staff who looked through Maxwell as though he were made of glass, this woman saw him. At 35, she had never imagined herself serving drinks to people who casually discussed millions. 6 years earlier, she had been Dr. Monroe, rising star in toxicology research at Meridian Pharmaceutical. Then came her discovery of falsified safety data, her refusal to sign off, and the swift, merciless retribution that left her blacklisted. From her station near the eastern archway, Layla observed Cassandra take Maxwell's glass to the bar. The bartender turned away momentarily, and in that fleeting moment, Cassandra's hand moved to her clutch. Something small transferred from purse to palm to tumbler, a movement so fluid that anyone else would have missed it entirely. Across the room, Maxwell felt the familiar sensation of being watched. He turned slightly, catching Layla's gaze before she could lower it. Unlike the other staff, this woman saw him, not his wealth or position, but the increasingly hollow man beneath the Tom Ford suit. "You're Scotch, darling." Cassandra had returned, offering the crystal tumbler with a smile that suggested both intimacy and distance. "Single malt, 1 ice cube. just as you prefer." Maxwell accepted the drink, catching the faintest scent of something metallic beneath the peaty aroma. "Thank you," he murmured, bringing the glass to his lips but not drinking. "Shall we greet the senator?" As they crossed the ballroom, Maxwell felt the slight numbness in his fingertips that had plagued him for weeks. The doctors had found nothing conclusive. Stress, they suggested. Rest and vitamins were prescribed, tests scheduled and forgotten in the crush of merger negotiations. While Maxwell engaged in the delicate dance of implied favors with Senator Morrison, Layla circulated with a silver tray of champagne. She moved with purpose toward the East Wing's service corridor, slipping through the hidden door that connected to the kitchen. Once inside the staff passage, she set down her tray and extracted a small vial from her pocket, carefully removing the drinking straw she had managed to take from Maxwell's discarded glass earlier that evening. In the mansion's small staff laboratory, installed for testing food allergens, Layla locked the door and quickly prepared a slide with the residue from the straw. Under the microscope, her suspicions crystallized into certainty. The distinctive crystalline structures were unmistakable to someone with her background: thallium compounds. The perfect poison for a long-game strategy, small doses accumulated in the body over time, mimicking dozens of natural illnesses before eventually causing a seemingly natural organ failure. Back in the ballroom, Maxwell excused himself from the senator's circle, weaving between guests toward his private study. The tremor in his hand had worsened, accompanied now by a slight blurring at the edges of his vision. The study door closed behind him with a solid thunk of old-growth oak against frame. In this sanctuary, Maxwell loosened his bow tie and collapsed into his chair, finally allowing the facade to crack. He reached for the crystal water pitcher kept on his desk, but his suddenly clumsy fingers sent it crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering crystal echoed in the room. The door opened almost immediately. Instead of security, Layla stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from servile blank to sharp concern. "Mr. Harrington," she said, closing the door behind her, "you need medical attention." Maxwell attempted to wave her away. "Simply overtired. The merger is not causing thallium toxicity," Layla interrupted, dropping all pretense of deference. "Your symptoms, tremors, peripheral neuropathy beginning in the extremities, vision changes, the distinct blue line forming at your gum line, are consistent with systematic heavy metal poisoning." The clinical precision of her assessment cut through Maxwell's fog. "Who are you?" he managed. "Someone who recognizes poison when she sees it," Layla answered, kneeling to check his pulse. "Your wife has been adding thallium to your drinks, likely for months, given your symptom progression. Low doses, accumulated over time. Tonight's was stronger than previous administrations." Disbelief warred with a deeper recognition of truth in Maxwell's expression. "That's... If you go to the hospital now claiming poisoning, she'll deny everything. The thallium will metabolize quickly, and any tests will show inconclusive results by morning." Layla's voice remained calm, almost detached. "You need to continue appearing affected, but stop consuming anything she prepares or handles. I can help document the evidence, but you need to decide quickly if you want to survive." "Why would you help me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because 4 years ago, your wife's cousin sat on the board that destroyed my career when I refused to falsify toxicology results. Because your investment firm funded the legal team that ensured I'd never work in medical research again." Her eyes held his, neither flinching nor apologizing. "And because regardless of that history, I took an oath to prevent harm when I can." Maxwell Harrington, master of acquisition and conquest, found himself in uncharted territory. Genuine vulnerability before someone who had every reason to wish him harm, yet offered salvation instead. "What do we do?" he asked finally. For the first time, Layla's composed expression softened slightly. First, we need to get activated charcoal into your system to bind the thallium. Then we document everything, your symptoms, your wife's movements, the compound itself. We create a record no one can dispute. She hesitated before adding, and you need to understand that once we begin, there's no going back. The woman you married will become your most dangerous enemy. Begin, he said simply. Neither could have predicted how that single word would transform them both, igniting a dangerous game where poison flowed not just through veins, but through the very foundations of power and privilege they each navigated in their own way. Chapter 2. Poison and Privilege. 3 days after the gala, Layla moved through the Harrington estate with deliberate purpose. The morning light filtered through towering windows, casting long shadows across marble floors that she had memorized in her 6 months of employment. The mansion operated like a small nation, staff hierarchies, territories, and unspoken rules governing every interaction. As one of the newer employees, she occupied the lowest tier, assigned to the least desirable tasks and schedules. This morning, however, provided opportunity. Cassandra had departed for her monthly spa retreat in Vermont, a full-day affair that wouldn't see her return until evening. Maxwell had sequestered himself in his home office for an international conference call that would last hours. The security detail maintained their perimeter posts, leaving the interior relatively unwatched. Perfect timing. Layla slipped into Cassandra's private suite, latex gloves thin against her skin. The room exuded calculated femininity, French antiques, silk draperies, and a vanity displaying crystal perfume bottles like museum pieces. She moved directly to the bathroom, where a locked cabinet stood above the marble sink. The lock yielded easily to the skills she'd acquired in her whistleblower days. Inside, arranged with pharmaceutical precision, stood rows of expensive skincare products, prescription medications, and, exactly as she'd suspected, a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. The box contained 6 vials of clear liquid and a digital scale accurate to milligrams. Layla photographed everything with her phone, careful not to disturb the precise arrangement. After testing microscopic samples with portable equipment disguised as cosmetics in her uniform pocket, her suspicions were confirmed. Thallium sulfate, pure and precisely measured. "What are you doing in my wife's bathroom?" The voice froze her blood. Layla turned slowly, finding Maxwell leaning against the doorframe, expression unreadable. Gone was the polished titan of industry. In his place stood a man in cashmere loungewear, complexion ashen, dark circles like bruises beneath his eyes. The tremor in his hand had worsened. "Finding proof that she's killing you," Layla answered, removing her gloves. "Your conference call ended early." "It never existed," he replied. "I wanted to see what you would do without supervision." His gaze drifted to the open cabinet, the exposed wooden box. "What did you find?" Layla held up her phone, showing the chemical analysis. "Thallium sulfate, consistent with your symptoms, expensive, difficult to trace, and remarkably efficient. Your wife has excellent taste in poison." Rather than shock or disbelief, Maxwell's expression showed only a weary recognition. He crossed to the tub and lowered himself onto its edge, suddenly appearing every day of his 47 years, and then some. "I've been monitoring my symptoms for weeks," he admitted. "Food journal, surveillance of my private quarters. But I couldn't determine the vector." His laugh held no humor. "I suspected my chef, my assistant, even my doctor, never Cassandra." "It's always those closest who have both opportunity and motive," Layla said, her clinical tone masking deeper emotions. "The question now is what you want to do with this information." Maxwell studied her face, searching for something beyond professional detachment. "Why did you come to work here, Ms. Monroe? With your qualifications, you could have found a position in any number of laboratories. Not after Meridian Pharmaceutical destroyed my reputation. The bitterness slipped through before she could contain it. Your wife's cousin sits on their board. After I reported falsified safety data, they made sure I'd never work in research again. Eventually, Bill's forced compromise. Understanding dawned in Maxwell's eyes. Yet you're helping me. I took an oath once. It still means something to me. Layla began returning items exactly as she found them. And perhaps I enjoy the irony that the skills they destroyed me for possessing might save the life of someone they value. Maxwell stood, moving closer. Despite his weakened state, he still commanded presence. You've created an unusual situation, Ms. Monroe. I now have evidence that my wife is attempting to murder me, delivered by a woman with legitimate grievances against my extended family. I've documented everything, Layla replied calmly. If something happens to me, evidence goes to authorities. I'm not blackmailing you, Mr. Harrington. I'm saving your life. The question is whether you'll let me. Their gazes locked in silent assessment. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against windows like impatient fingers. What do you propose? He finally asked. First, secure your food and drink. I'll handle that personally. Layla closed the cabinet, leaving no trace of their intrusion. Second, we monitor and document every instance of tampering. Build a case meticulously, with unassailable evidence. And in the meantime, I pretend not to know my wife is poisoning me. The question carried equal parts disbelief and resignation. Yes, while we administer activated charcoal and chelation therapy to remove accumulated thallium from your system, you'll appear to worsen while actually improving. Layla's expression softened fractionally. It requires absolute trust between us. Maxwell laughed. A short, sharp sound. Trust is a luxury I apparently can't afford, but necessity makes strange allies. A noise in the hallway silenced them both. Footsteps approached, the distinct click of household manager Davis's Oxford shoes on marble. Without warning, Maxwell closed the distance between them, one hand capturing Layla's wrist, while the other tilted her chin upward. His voice dropped to a whisper against her ear. Davis is loyal to Cassandra. If he finds us here, everything is compromised. The footsteps paused outside the suite. Layla's pulse hammered against Maxwell's fingers, still circling her wrist. What are you suggesting? Scandal hides scandal, he murmured. Follow my lead. The door handle turned just as Maxwell pressed Layla against the bathroom wall, his body caging hers in what would appear, to any observer, as an intimate embrace between employer and employee. The calculated risk took her breath. An affair, while inappropriate, would explain their presence in Cassandra's private space far better than murder investigation. Davis's shocked, "Sir," provided cover for Layla to slip the evidence bag into her uniform pocket. Maxwell didn't release her immediately, his eyes conveying silent instruction to maintain their charade. Davis, Maxwell acknowledged without turning, his voice carrying practiced irritation at interruption. I believe I left instructions not to be disturbed this morning. Yes, sir. Apologies, sir. The household manager's discomfort was palpable. Mrs. Harrington called. Her car will arrive early, within the hour. The news landed like a lightning strike between them. Maxwell's fingers tightened imperceptibly around Layla's wrist, not painful, but urgent. Thank you, Davis. That will be all. Maxwell's dismissal carried the weight of absolute authority. When the door closed, he stepped back, professional distance restored with unsettling ease. You have 1 hour to explain exactly how we proceed from here. My study, 5 minutes. Alone in Cassandra's bathroom, Layla steadied herself against the marble counter. The encounter had been strategic, a calculated performance to protect their discovery. Yet the memory of his proximity lingered like electricity on her skin, an unexpected complication in an already dangerous situation. Her reflection showed flushed cheeks and two bright eyes. "Focus," she whispered to herself. "This isn't about you." But as she slipped from the suite toward Maxwell's study, Layla knew they had crossed a critical threshold. The game evolving between powerful husband, poisonous wife, and the woman caught between them had just acquired dimensions neither she nor Maxwell had anticipated. In the study, Maxwell stood at the window watching rain transform his manicured gardens into something wild and ungoverned. Without turning, he spoke as Layla closed the door behind her. "She wants me dead. I need to understand why." "Money is usually sufficient motive," Layla answered, remaining near the door. "Your estate is worth billions, your company considerably more. Cassandra already has access to more wealth than she could spend in several lifetimes." Maxwell turned, his expression hardened. "This is about control, not capital." Layla hesitated, then crossed to his desk where a laptop sat open. "May I?" At his nod, she navigated through financial news archives, pulling up a story that had circulated in business publications 3 months earlier. "Rumor has it that you've been considering a merger with Elysium Biotech." Understanding dawned in Maxwell's eyes. "A direct competitor to Meridian Pharmaceutical, where your career ended, and where Cassandra's cousin stands to lose hundreds of millions if the merger proceeds." Layla closed the laptop. Connections between Harrington Global and Elysium would create a conglomerate powerful enough to absorb or destroy Meridian within years. "She's killing me to protect family interests," Maxwell concluded, an edge of disbelief in his voice. "People have committed murder for far less." Layla removed a small bottle from her pocket. "Activated charcoal. Take it with water every 6 hours. It will bind to the poison in your system." Maxwell accepted the bottle, their fingers brushing briefly. "How do we proceed with Cassandra returning early?" "You'll dine with her tonight. I'll ensure your food remains uncontaminated. You'll continue showing symptoms: progressive weakness, occasional confusion, digestive distress." Layla's voice remained clinical despite the intimacy of their discussion. "Meanwhile, I'll document every instance of tampering. We build a case methodically." "And when we have sufficient evidence?" "That depends on what you want, Mr. Harrington. Justice, revenge, leverage." Layla studied his face. "Or perhaps just survival." Before he could answer, his phone chimed with a security alert. Cassandra's car had passed through the estate's main gate. Their time was up. "We'll continue this discussion later," Maxwell said, slipping the bottle into his pocket. "For now, we maintain appearances. All of them." The implication hung between them, their staged intimacy in the bathroom, now part of the complex web of deceptions. They were weaving. As Layla turned to leave, Maxwell called after her. "Ms. Monroe." She paused at the door. "Why risk everything to help someone connected to those who destroyed you?" For the first time, genuine emotion cracked through her professional facade. "Because watching someone die when you have the power to prevent it destroys something essential in yourself. I've lost enough already." She straightened her uniform. "And perhaps because I believe in justice more than revenge." The sound of Cassandra's arrival echoed through the mansion. Cheerful greetings to staff, the clatter of luggage, the familiar rhythm of the lady of the house returning to her domain. From opposite ends of the estate, Maxwell and Layla prepared to play their parts in a performance where failure meant death. Outside, the storm intensified, thunder rolling across manicured grounds that concealed darker threats beneath their perfect surface. Chapter 3. The Hidden Ledger. 2 weeks passed in a dangerous ballet of secrets. Maxwell continued his performance as the gradually declining titan of industry, while Layla administered chelation therapy in the privacy of his study. Under her care, his true condition improved, even as he convincingly displayed worsening symptoms for Cassandra's benefit: small stumbles during dinner parties, a dropped glass at an important meeting, visible weight loss that earned sympathetic glances from board members. Tonight, the Harringtons hosted the governor and his entourage. From her position serving champagne, Layla watched Cassandra lean close to Maxwell at the dinner table, one manicured hand resting possessively on his arm as she murmured something that made him smile tightly. The performance was flawless, concerned wife attending to her increasingly frail husband. "More champagne, sir?" Layla asked as she approached Maxwell, their coded signal that she needed to communicate something urgent. "Yes, please." His fingers brushed hers as he handed her his glass, a gesture invisible to others but electric between them. Minutes later they met in the library's hidden alcove. "She's meeting Richard tonight," Layla whispered, her voice barely audible over distant dinner conversation. "In the pool house, after midnight." Maxwell's expression hardened. "You're certain?" "I intercepted a text while charging her phone. They've been communicating through a banking app's messaging feature, hiding correspondence in plain sight." "Clever," he acknowledged, the compliment tasting bitter. "We need to know what they're planning. The pool house has surveillance, but the feed routes through Cassandra's private security server. She'll know if we access it." Maxwell's eyes met hers, decision made. "Then we observe in person." The remainder of the evening passed in excruciating slowness. Layla cleared plates while mentally calculating sightlines and hiding places in the pool house. Maxwell entertained politicians while tracking his wife's movements with newfound awareness. At 11, Maxwell made a show of retiring early, complaining of fatigue. Cassandra kissed his forehead with practiced tenderness, promising to join him soon. By 11:30, Layla had changed from her uniform into black clothes suitable for nighttime surveillance. At 11:45, she slipped like a shadow across the moonlit grounds toward the pool house. Maxwell waited for her in the shelter of ornamental hedges, similarly dressed in dark clothing that transformed him from billionaire to spectre. "The east entrance has a blind spot in the security coverage," she whispered, her breath visible in the night air. "Follow exactly in my footsteps." They entered the pool house, a modernist structure of glass and steel centered around an Olympic-sized pool, and concealed themselves in the elevated equipment room overlooking the main space. Through slatted vents, they had perfect visual access while remaining hidden. At midnight precisely, the pool house lights activated at low intensity. Cassandra entered first, still wearing the emerald gown from dinner. Richard followed minutes later, Maxwell's CFO of 8 years, a man who had been best man at their wedding. "They've moved the timeline up," Richard said without preamble, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "The Elysium merger paperwork is nearly complete. Once Maxwell signs, your family's holdings in Meridian will be worthless." "He won't live to sign anything," Cassandra replied, removing her earrings with practiced ease. The latest dose was triple strength. His kidneys should fail within the week. Beside Layla, Maxwell went completely still. Feeling his tension, she placed her hand over his, a silent reminder to remain calm, to continue gathering evidence. "Medical examiners might detect thallium in the autopsy," Richard cautioned. Cassandra's laugh was crystalline and cold. "They'll find nothing. My cousin at Meridian provided a compound that metabolizes completely. It's untraceable after 72 hours. She crossed to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. "Besides, no one questions when a man with Maxwell's stress levels and workaholic tendencies collapses from apparent exhaustion." "And after," Richard asked, accepting the champagne, "the board will expect leadership. You'll become interim CEO while I play the grieving widow." Cassandra's smile was predatory. 6 months later, overcome by shared grief, we find comfort in each other's arms, Society will forgive the impropriety given the tragedy. And Elysium will be destroyed rather than merged. Meridian will acquire their patents at bankruptcy prices. She raised her glass. To partnerships in business and pleasure. Their glasses clinked as Maxwell's grip tightened painfully around Layla's hand. "We should leave," she whispered, but he shook his head, eyes fixed on the scene below. Richard set down his glass and pulled Cassandra into a kiss that carried the familiarity of long practice. As clothing began to fall to the marble floor, Maxwell finally turned away. They exited as silently as they had entered, crossing the moonlit grounds with the weight of what they'd witnessed hanging between them. Only when they reached the safety of his study did Maxwell finally speak. 8 years, he said, voice hollow. Richard has been with me since the beginning. He attended my first wedding, stood beside me at my father's funeral. His composure cracked slightly. And Cassandra, I knew our marriage lacked passion, but this level of calculated betrayal. Layla poured 2 fingers of bourbon, offering him the glass. The personal betrayal masks the professional one. This isn't just about your marriage, it's about your company. The merger with Elysium threatens Meridian's market dominance. They're killing me for market share. Maxwell's laugh held no humor as he took the glass. People have committed murder for less. Layla echoed her words from weeks earlier. Maxwell studied her face in the low light. You warned me. From the beginning, you understood what we were facing. He took a step closer. Why risk everything to help me? The truth, this time. Layla met his gaze unflinchingly. Because I recognized in you what happened to me. Someone else controlling the narrative of your life, your death, making you disappear by inches. Her voice softened. No one deserves that fate, not even a Harrington. The space between them charged with something beyond their strange alliance, recognition between 2 people who had glimpsed beneath each other's carefully constructed facades. What do we do now? He asked. Layla placed her phone on his desk, revealing the recording she'd made of the entire pool house conversation. Now we make our move. But first, we need to find Cassandra's ledger, the real financial record she's keeping with Richard, evidence that will stand up in court. And where would we find such a thing? Hidden in plain sight, Layla answered, a plan already forming. But retrieving it requires taking our deception to the next level. She hesitated before adding, it means ensuring Cassandra believes she's winning, which means you need to appear significantly worse by morning. Understanding dawned in Maxwell's eyes. You want to simulate a medical crisis. One serious enough to convince Cassandra her plan is working, but controlled enough not to cause actual harm. Layla's expression was grim. It's dangerous, but it will give us the opportunity we need. Maxwell finished his bourbon in a single swallow. Decision made. Tell me what to do. In the darkness of the study, their conspiracy deepened. Predator becoming prey, hunter becoming hunted. By morning, the delicate power balance of the Harrington estate would shift irrevocably, setting in motion events that would either save Maxwell's life or end it completely. Chapter 4. The Collapse. The annual Harrington Foundation Gala represented old money's finest tradition, obscene wealth masquerading as philanthropy. 500 guests in couture and custom tuxedos filled the grand ballroom, each having donated significant sums to children's cancer research for the privilege of proximity to power. Maxwell stood at the podium, his appearance meticulously crafted. The subtle weight loss from weeks of poisoning had been enhanced by makeup. His naturally commanding presence now carried an undercurrent of fragility that drew concerned whispers. For 15 years, he addressed the crowd, voice deliberately weakened. The Harrington Foundation has committed itself to funding research others consider too risky. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce a $50 million grant to Dr. Eleanor Chen's revolutionary treatment protocol. From her position against the back wall, Layla monitored everything. Maxwell's performance, Cassandra's rehearsed concern, Richard's carefully neutral expression as he stood among board members. The past 48 hours had been spent preparing for this moment, this calculated risk. Cassandra circulated through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting sympathetic touches to her arm, whispered concerns about her husband's appearance. He insists on fulfilling his commitments, she told the senator's wife, with a perfect blend of admiration and worry. No matter what his doctors advise. At precisely 9:30, Maxwell faltered mid-sentence. The microphone captured his sudden intake of breath, amplifying it throughout the ballroom. 500 conversations ceased instantly. "I apologize," he managed, gripping the podium. His left hand displayed the distinctive tremor that had first alerted Layla weeks ago, now dramatically worse. His complexion turned ashen, and a thin line of blue appeared at his gum line, a classic marker of heavy metal poisoning that medical professionals in the audience would recognize. His pupils constricted visibly under the bright lights, and a cold sweat broke across his forehead. "Seems I'm a bit—" His voice slurred slightly, another neurological symptom consistent with thallium toxicity. The stumble was masterful, incorporating actual medical symptoms of thallium poisoning the doctors present would later confirm in testimony. Cassandra moved forward, the picture of wifely concern as Maxwell braced himself against the lectern. "Darling, let me help you," she murmured, loud enough for the front tables to hear. She signaled a waiter who brought forward a glass of water. As planned, Layla observed Cassandra's hand, move briefly to her clutch before offering Maxwell the glass. "Thank you," Maxwell said, his expression perfect, gratitude tinged with vulnerability as he accepted the poisoned water from his would-be murderer. Layla moved swiftly through the crowd. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon would seem suspicious. Too late would allow Maxwell to actually consume the thallium dose. Just as the glass touched his lips, she approached the stage. "Mr. Harrington," she called, her voice carrying urgency, "your medication." All eyes turned to the maid, interrupting this dramatic moment. Cassandra's expression flashed murderous before smoothing into polite annoyance. "Thank you, but he's already taken it," Cassandra replied coldly. Layla held up a prescription bottle. "Dr. Weiss was quite clear, ma'am. Given this morning's test results, Mr. Harrington needs this immediately." The tension was exquisite. Maxwell wavered visibly, the glass of water trembling in his hand. With perfect dramatic timing, he lurched forward, the glass tumbling from his grasp and shattering on the marble floor. The audience gasped as Maxwell collapsed. Chaos erupted. Security swarmed. Cassandra cried out with convincing distress, dropping to her knees beside her husband. Layla pushed through, kneeling opposite Cassandra. "He needs space," Layla insisted, medical authority in her voice. "And that medication now." Cassandra's eyes locked with hers across Maxwell's seemingly unconscious form. Something dangerous flickered there. Recognition that this servant was becoming an obstacle. "The ambulance is 3 minutes out," announced the head of security. "I'll accompany my husband, of course," Cassandra stated, already planning how to control the hospital narrative. "No!" The voice came from Maxwell, weak but clear as his eyes fluttered open. "I need Layla. She knows my medical history." Cassandra's perfect composure cracked for an instant. "Darling, I'm your wife." "Please," Maxwell whispered, his performance flawless as he reached for Layla's hand instead of Cassandra's. "Trust me." The paramedics arrived, loading Maxwell onto a stretcher. Before Cassandra could object further, Layla climbed into the ambulance beside him, the doors closing on Cassandra's stunned expression. The moment they were alone, Maxwell's eyes opened fully, all weakness vanishing. Did you get it? Yes. Layla held up her phone, showing the video she'd captured of Cassandra doctoring the water. And the glass fragments are in my pocket, evidence secured. The paramedics, private contractors Maxwell had arranged, nodded in approval. This was no medical emergency, but a carefully orchestrated extraction. Take us to Dr. Weiss, Maxwell instructed. She's expecting us. 20 minutes later, they arrived not at the hospital, but at a private clinic, where Dr. Catherine Weiss, a toxicologist who had once worked alongside Layla before the Meridian scandal, waited with a team of trusted medical professionals. Cassandra will realize something's wrong when we don't arrive at Massachusetts General, Layla noted as they entered through a secured back entrance. That's counting on it, Maxwell replied, straightening his tie now that the performance had ended. While she's searching hospitals, we'll be accessing her private accounts. Dr. Weiss greeted them with professional efficiency. The lab is prepared for the samples, and I've reviewed the blood work from last week. The chelation therapy is working. Thallium levels are dropping. We need official documentation, Layla explained, evidence that will stand up to legal scrutiny. And we need it quickly, Maxwell added. When Cassandra realizes I've disappeared with evidence of her attempted murder, she'll move to protect herself, likely by destroying financial records connecting her to Richard and Meridian. Unless she can't access those records, Layla said, removing a small flash drive from her pocket. While simulating your symptoms last night, I managed to clone her laptop. I've identified a hidden partition containing what appears to be the real ledger. Maxwell's expression shifted from surprise to admiration. You continue to exceed expectations, Ms. Monroe. The password is still encrypted, she cautioned, and we'll need actual access to her computer to retrieve the full files. Which brings us to Phase 2. Maxwell turned to Dr. Weiss. How quickly can you process the glass fragments? We need confirmation of thallium presence within hours, not days. For you, we'll have results by midnight. Dr. Weiss gestured to her team to begin work. As medical staff catalogued evidence and drew blood samples for official documentation, Maxwell and Layla retreated to a private consultation room to plan their next move. Cassandra will be frantic by now, Layla noted, checking her phone. Security cameras show her calling Richard from the car. They're mobilizing. Good. Desperation leads to mistakes. Maxwell loosened his bow tie, the weight of their gambit evident in his expression. But we're taking an enormous risk. If we fail to secure irrefutable evidence, we won't fail, Layla interrupted with quiet certainty. She hesitated before adding, but there's something I haven't told you. Maxwell's gaze sharpened. What? The hidden accounts I found on Cassandra's computer, they don't just link to Meridian. There's evidence suggesting connections to offshore accounts used to hide profits from pharmaceuticals that failed safety testing, the very drugs I refused to approve before they destroyed my career. You suspected this from the beginning, Maxwell realized. This isn't just about saving my life. It's about clearing your name. Layla met his gaze unflinchingly. Justice serves multiple purposes. The silence between them carried the weight of this new understanding, their alliance more complex than either had acknowledged. After a moment, Maxwell smiled slightly. I admire your strategy, Ms. Monroe, using me to achieve justice for yourself. And I admire your resilience, Mr. Harrington. Not many men could partner with someone who once viewed their entire world as corrupt. Something shifted in Maxwell's expression. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. He moved closer, the professional distance between them diminishing. When this is over, he said quietly, when Cassandra and Richard are facing consequences and Meridian's corruption is exposed, what then? The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to voice. Before Layla could respond, Dr. Weiss knocked and entered. We have preliminary results. The water glass contained thallium sulfate, consistent with the compound we've been treating, and the samples from the past 2 weeks show increasing concentrations. She's been escalating the dosage. Evidence of attempted murder, Maxwell concluded. Enough for police involvement, Dr. Weiss confirmed. Maxwell and Layla exchanged glances, the silent communication of conspirators who had moved beyond mere alliance. Not yet, Maxwell decided. First, we need the financial records proving motive. Without those, Cassandra might claim it was a misunderstanding, a supplement gone wrong. Which means returning to the mansion, Layla said, the danger implicit in her tone. Yes. While Cassandra searches hospitals, we retrieve the evidence from her computer. Maxwell's expression hardened with determination. Tonight, we end this. As they prepared to leave the safety of the clinic, the weight of their next move hung between them. Maxwell paused at the door, turning to Layla with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Why did you really help me?" he asked quietly. "Beyond justice or revenge, the truth." Layla considered the man before her, no longer the untouchable billionaire, but a partner in a dangerous game that had transformed them both. "Because when I looked at you that first night," she answered finally, "I saw someone else trapped in a cage of others' making, and I remembered what it felt like to have no allies when your life is at stake." The simplicity of her answer seemed to touch something in Maxwell. Without warning, he reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that transcended their careful professional boundaries. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, his voice low with intensity, "I am in your debt." The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility and danger. Then Maxwell released her hand, composure restored as they stepped into the night, their most perilous gambit yet to come. Chapter 5. Shattered Glass House. The Harrington estate stood silent under a midnight sky, security lights casting long shadows across manicured grounds. Maxwell and Layla observed from the shelter of trees bordering the property, both dressed in black. "Security protocols?" Maxwell asked, studying the mansion he'd called home for years, now seeing it through the eyes of an intruder. "Guards patrol the perimeter every 15 minutes, Layla replied. "The east entrance blind spot remains our best option." "And Cassandra? Still at Massachusetts General, according to your security chief's text. She's demanding to see you, causing quite a scene. Richard is with her." They moved across the grounds like shadows, using Maxwell's biometric signature to bypass security systems. At the service entrance, Layla disabled the secondary alarm with practiced efficiency. Inside, they moved directly to Cassandra's private study. Maxwell stood guard at the door while Layla worked, her fingers moving across the keyboard with precision. "I'm in," Layla finally whispered. "Downloading the ledger and correspondence now." Maxwell moved to look over her shoulder. "What are we seeing?" "Financial transfers between Cassandra's shell companies and Meridian Pharmaceutical, dating back 3 years, before your marriage." Layla scrolled through documents. "Stock manipulations, insider trading, and..." "Here," she pointed to a series of transfers. "Payments to Richard from Cassandra's private accounts, beginning 2 months after your wedding." Maxwell realized their affair has been ongoing since the beginning. "It's worse," Layla continued, scrolling. "These medical reports, they're fabricated toxicology studies for Meridian's failed drugs, the same ones I refuse to certify. And here's correspondence about eliminating potential whistleblowers. My name is on their list, along with 3 others who mysteriously lost their careers." The sudden illumination of headlights on the driveway interrupted them. Through the window, they watched Richard's Aston Martin approach. "He's returned alone," Layla observed, hurrying to complete the download. "Cassandra must still be creating distractions at the hospital." The front door opened, followed by footsteps in the marble foyer. Richard's voice carried as he spoke on his phone. "She's still searching emergency rooms. I'll get the files and meet you at the airport. The jet is fueled and ready. Yes, I understand the urgency." Layla removed the flash drive just as Richard's footsteps approached the study. Maxwell pulled her into the adjacent powder room, closing the door silently behind them. Through the crack beneath the door, they could see Richard enter the study. "Damn it," he muttered. "Someone's been on this computer." "The files are gone," Richard said into his phone. "Yes, I'm looking at the computer now. Someone has accessed the hidden drive. No, security shows no breaches. This was someone who knows the system." A pause, then. "I'll check the surveillance footage. If it's her, we'll handle it permanently. The maid has become a liability." Maxwell positioned himself beside the door. At his nod, Layla deliberately made a sound, just enough to alert Richard. "Who's there?" Richard called, footsteps approaching the powder room. The moment the door began to open, Maxwell struck. Decades of boxing training channeled into a precise blow that caught Richard squarely in the jaw. The CFO stumbled backward as Maxwell emerged from hiding. "Maxwell!" Richard's shock was genuine. "You're supposed to be dying," Maxwell finished. "That was the plan, wasn't it? Poison me slowly, marry my wife, take my company." Richard recovered quickly. "You don't understand the situation. Cassandra approached me. She said you were planning to remove me during the Elysium merger." "You've never been a convincing liar, Richard." Maxwell's voice carried dangerous control. Richard lunged toward Layla, clearly intending to obtain the flash drive by force. Maxwell intercepted him, blocking the attack. They crashed into Cassandra's desk, sending crystal paperweights shattering across marble floors. When Richard pulled a letter opener from the desk, the stakes escalated. "Maxwell!" Layla called in warning, as Richard slashed wildly. The blade caught Maxwell's forearm, drawing blood. With calculated precision, Maxwell disarmed Richard, using the man's momentum against him to slam him into the wall. Richard slumped to the floor, dazed but conscious. "We need to go," Layla urged, pressing a handkerchief to Maxwell's bleeding arm. "Cassandra could return any minute." "Not yet." Maxwell retrieved Richard's phone from the floor, placing it on speaker. "Call Cassandra." Richard glared but complied when Maxwell twisted his arm behind his back. Cassandra answered on the second ring. "Tell me you have the files," she demanded without preamble. "Better," Maxwell replied. "I have Richard the files and evidence of your attempted murder." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before Cassandra's voice returned, ice cold. "Maxwell. What a surprise. Hardly the word I'd choose for discovering my wife and CFO conspired to poison me for financial gain." "A misunderstanding," Cassandra replied smoothly. "Whatever you think you've found has been manipulated by your new friend. The maid has her own agenda. The thallium in my system and in the water glass from tonight suggests otherwise. It's over, Cassandra. The evidence is already secured with my attorneys." Another pause before Cassandra spoke again, her tone shifting to something almost intimate. "We could resolve this privately, Maxwell. Richard was always the driving force. I was manipulated, afraid for my family's interests. We could start fresh." The desperation beneath her practiced poise was audible now. Maxwell met Layla's gaze across the room, drawing strength from her steady presence. "You miscalculated, Cassandra. Not just in thinking you could kill me slowly without detection, but in believing I valued wealth over genuine connection." Security alarms suddenly blared throughout the mansion. Richard had activated a panic button hidden beneath the desk. External lights flooded the grounds as armed guards responded to the alert. Maxwell delivered a precise blow to Richard's temple, rendering him unconscious before following Layla into the hallway. They moved swiftly through the mansion as security protocols activated around them, sealing exterior doors and windows. "The garage," Maxwell directed, leading them down a service corridor. "My private cars aren't connected to the main security system." They reached the underground garage just as the estate's lockdown completed. Maxwell's Aston Martin roared to life, tires squealing against polished concrete as they accelerated toward the single exit not yet sealed. Behind them, security guards opened fire, bullets pinging off reinforced metal as the car burst through gates designed to keep intruders out, never anticipating the owner's need to escape. On the private road leading away from the estate, Maxwell finally exhaled. Beside him, Layla clutched the flash drive containing everything needed to destroy Cassandra, Richard, and potentially Meridian Pharmaceutical itself. "What happens now?" Layla asked, her composed demeanor finally showing cracks of uncertainty. Maxwell glanced at her, their shared danger creating an intimacy beyond physical proximity. Blood still seeped from the cut on his arm, and adrenaline coursed through his system. "Now," he said, steering the car toward the private airfield where his jet waited, "we disappear long enough to organize our evidence and prepare for battle. They've shown their hand. We'll show ours when they least expect it." Chapter 6. Viper's Nest. Maxwell's private jet cut through darkness 30,000 feet above pursuit. The cabin's soft lighting illuminated Layla as she examined the evidence from Cassandra's computer, organizing files with methodical precision. "The financial trail is clear," she reported, sliding her laptop across the table to Maxwell. "Cassandra received quarterly payments from Meridian through offshore accounts. In exchange, your company steered clear of competing pharmaceutical investments." Maxwell studied the screen, jaw tightening. "All while I was planning the Elysium merger that would have exposed everything." "Her cousin at Meridian supplied the poison," Layla continued, opening another document. "These messages discuss the special compound and its untraceable properties. They were confident it would appear as natural organ failure. Arrogance makes for sloppy criminals." Maxwell touched his bandaged arm where Richard's letter opener had cut him. "We have enough to destroy them, but not yet enough leverage to ensure our safety," Layla cautioned. "Cassandra has connections throughout Boston society. Even with evidence of attempted murder, she could claim mental instability, temporary insanity, or blame everything on Richard," Maxwell finished. "We need the final piece, proof that this was premeditated from the beginning of our marriage." The plane began its descent toward a private airstrip in upstate New York. Dawn painted the horizon in muted golds and pinks, a new day emerging from darkness. "The safe house is prepared," Maxwell said, gathering their materials. "We'll have 24 hours before anyone could potentially track us." In the sleek black SUV waiting on the tarmac, tension finally caught up with them. Layla's hands trembled slightly as reaction set in. Maxwell noticed, hesitating before covering her hand with his. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "Calculating risks," she corrected, not withdrawing from his touch. "We've made powerful enemies tonight." "We were already their targets," Maxwell reminded her. "The difference is now we're fighting back." The safe house proved to be a modernist structure built into a hillside overlooking a lake, all glass and steel hidden by strategic landscaping. Inside, minimalist luxury suggested a space designed for temporary occupation rather than permanent residence. "Security perimeter is active," Maxwell confirmed, checking monitors concealed behind a sliding panel. "We're isolated and protected." A charged silence filled the space as the adrenaline of escape faded, leaving them suddenly aware of their isolation. Maxwell moved to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "Two unlikely alliances," he offered, extending a glass. Layla accepted, their fingers brushing. "To surviving the night." The morning passed in focused productivity, organizing evidence, establishing secure communications with Maxwell's most trusted attorneys, developing strategy for the coming confrontation. "Your board will likely side with Cassandra initially," Layla predicted, studying corporate structures on her laptop. "She's been cultivating them for years, according to these communications." "Let them," Maxwell replied, surprising her. "The longer Cassandra believes she's winning, the more mistakes she'll make." A notification on Layla's phone drew her attention. "Speaking of mistakes, Cassandra just issued a press release. She's claiming you suffered a mental breakdown, that you've been unstable for months and fled medical care with the assistance of an unqualified staff member with a vendetta." Maxwell took the phone, reading the artfully crafted statement. "She's laying groundwork to discredit any accusations we make. Clever." "She's also frozen your personal accounts," Layla added, showing another alert. "Not the corporate holdings she can't access, but enough to complicate our movements." Instead of concern, Maxwell's expression showed satisfaction. "Exactly as anticipated, which means she's also activated the tracking protocols on your known residences and vehicles," Layla finished. "Everything except this property, which is held through 7 layers of shells corporations and registered to your college roommate's identity." Their eyes met in shared understanding. The trap was set, with Cassandra believing she was the hunter rather than the hunted. "How long until the blood tests are publicly certified?" Maxwell asked. Dr. Weiss promised results by noon. "Once filed with authorities, Cassandra will be forced to respond to actual evidence rather than controlling the narrative." Maxwell moved to the window, watching sunlight shimmer across the lake below. "And then the real game begins." Layla joined him, her reflection appearing beside his in the glass. "You almost sound like you're enjoying this." "There's clarity in crisis," he admitted. "For years I've moved through a world of false smiles and hidden agendas. At least now the battle lines are drawn honestly." Their reflections stood close, almost touching in the glass. When Maxwell turned to face her, the professional distance that had defined their relationship blurred. "Why did you really come to work at my estate?" he asked quietly. "The truth, Layla." She held his gaze steadily. "Initially, to gather evidence against Meridian by accessing your corporate files. I needed proof they falsified data that cost lives and my career. And then you discovered Cassandra was poisoning me." "A complication I didn't anticipate," she acknowledged. "Suddenly my mission to expose pharmaceutical corruption became entangled with saving your life." "An inconvenient moral dilemma," Maxwell observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I considered looking the other way," Layla admitted, "for about 3 seconds. The honesty between them, raw and unfiltered, created an intimacy more profound than their physical proximity." Maxwell's hand rose to her face, fingers tracing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. "And now," he asked softly, "what mission drives you?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had acknowledged until this moment of forced pause between danger past and danger to come. Before Layla could answer, Maxwell's secure phone chimed with an incoming message. The spell broken, they stepped apart as Maxwell checked the alert. "Dr. Weiss has filed the toxicology report with authorities," he announced. "Cassandra has been officially contacted by Boston police regarding allegations of attempted homicide." "Then we don't have much time," Layla said, professional focus returning. "She'll mobilize every resource to discredit or bury the evidence." "Let her try." Maxwell's expression hardened with resolve. "We have one advantage she can never match." "What's that?" "She believes power lies in wealth and connection," he said simply. "We know it lies in truth and unexpected alliances." Their gazes held, something unspoken yet undeniable passing between them, a recognition that whatever began as necessary cooperation had evolved into something neither had anticipated, something that would fundamentally alter both their lives, regardless of how their battle against Cassandra ultimately resolved. Chapter 7. Blood in the Water. Boston's financial district buzzed with the day's most explosive story. Headlines screamed variations of Harrington heir accuses wife of poisoning plot and pharmaceutical connection in billionaire murder attempt. Cassandra stood in her attorney's office, watching CNN's coverage on a wall-mounted screen. Her composed exterior revealed nothing of her inner fury, as reporters speculated about the toxicology report filed with authorities. "This is manageable," insisted Gerald Hoffman, her silver-haired lawyer. "The police have questions, not charges. Without Maxwell's direct testimony, they have limited options." "I want him found," Cassandra stated, her voice glacial, and the maid eliminated as a credible witness. At the safe house, Maxwell and Layla monitored the unfolding media storm. Every major network covered the story, financial markets reacting as Harrington Global stock dropped 12 points in early trading. "Your board has called an emergency meeting," Layla noted, scanning alerts on her tablet. A secure message from Maxwell's private investigator appeared. "See met with known fixer in Back Bay. Surveillance photos attached." The images showed Cassandra entering a nondescript office building, followed by a man identified as Victor Desarian, former intelligence operative with concerning specialties. "She's hiring professionals to find us," Maxwell observed, expression grim. As technical preparations were finalized for Maxwell's remote interview with a trusted financial journalist, Layla noticed Maxwell standing at the window, unusually still. "Second thoughts?" she asked. "Calculating endgames," he corrected. "Once this interview airs, there's no returning to my previous life." The interview proceeded precisely as planned. Maxwell appeared composed and rational, despite Cassandra's claims. He methodically presented evidence of the poisoning while explaining the connection to Meridian Pharmaceuticals' corruption. "This goes beyond my attempted murder," Maxwell explained on camera. "We've uncovered systematic corruption involving falsified pharmaceutical safety testing that has potentially harmed thousands. Within hours, Meridian Pharmaceutical stock plummeted 40%. Federal agencies announced investigations into both the poisoning allegations and pharmaceutical testing protocols." Cassandra's response came swiftly. By evening, every major outlet received anonymous information about Layla's past, painted in the darkest possible light. Headlines shifted. Harrington's mysterious companion, disgraced researcher with vendetta, and whistleblower or manipulator. Photos appeared showing Layla at protests outside Meridian years earlier. Her graduate school dissertation questioning pharmaceutical testing protocols was selectively quoted to suggest anti-industry bias. "They're coming after you personally," Maxwell noted as they reviewed the coverage. "Expected," Layla replied with forced calm, though the public dissection of her life clearly affected her. A secure alert disrupted their analysis. Surveillance detected unusual activity near the properties owned by Layla's only living relative, her grandmother in assisted living. "They found her," Layla whispered, fear replacing professional detachment. "They're sending a message." Maxwell immediately activated contingency protocols, dispatching his security team to extract Layla's grandmother to a protected location. "I never should have involved you," Layla said, as they waited for confirmation of her grandmother's safety. "You involved yourself the moment you noticed I was being poisoned," Maxwell reminded her. "Everything since has been necessary survival." When confirmation finally came that her grandmother was secure, something shifted irrevocably between them. Relief broke through Layla's composed exterior, and without hesitation Maxwell drew her into his arms. The embrace crossed the final boundary, separating reluctant allies from something profoundly more complicated. Layla's head rested against his shoulder, her professional reserve temporarily abandoned in the face of nearly losing her only family. "This ends tomorrow," Maxwell promised, his voice low against her hair. "We've gathered enough evidence for the federal investigation to proceed without us." Before she could respond, breaking news alerts flooded their secure devices. Cassandra had called a press conference, standing poised and tearful before cameras as she made a shocking announcement. "After much painful reflection," she told the assembled reporters, "I must reveal the devastating truth. My husband's concerning behavior stems from a diagnosis he received 6 months ago, early-onset dementia, exacerbated by stress and experimental treatments." With perfect theatrical timing, Cassandra's voice broke. "I've established a $10 million reward for information leading to my husband's safe return to proper medical care. The Harrington family has a documented history of early-onset dementia. Maxwell's father suffered similarly." She produced medical records supposedly linking Maxwell's symptoms to his father's disease pattern. Former colleagues appeared on screen, carefully coached to describe subtle changes in Maxwell's behavior over the previous year. A neurologist from Johns Hopkins validated the possible hereditary connection without directly examining Maxwell. "Impressive," Maxwell finally said, dark admiration in his tone. "She's not just raised the stakes, she's rewritten reality. Every person who's ever met me will now question their memories, searching for signs they might have missed." Their eyes met in silent communication, both recognizing the dangerous new phase of their battle. The woman who had methodically poisoned her husband now portrayed herself as his savior, while those who exposed the truth were branded as manipulative and unstable. "What now?" Layla asked quietly. Maxwell's expression hardened with resolve. "Now we stop playing defense." Chapter 8. The Devil's Archive. "Dementia," Maxwell said, pacing the safe-house living room. "Calculated and almost impossible to disprove quickly. She must have been preparing this contingency for months." Layla worked furiously at her laptop, analyzing the medical documents Cassandra had presented to the press. "These forgeries are impressive. They show supposed cognitive assessments dating back 8 months, with digital signatures from 3 specialists at Massachusetts General." "She's leveraging my family's history," Maxwell noted grimly. "My father's early-onset dementia gives her story credibility. The press is already connecting those dots. The television showed medical experts discussing hereditary patterns of cognitive decline, while commentators questioned whether poisoning accusations might be symptomatic of paranoid delusions. The public narrative was shifting rapidly in Cassandra's favor. Their secure phone rang, Maxwell's private investigator with critical information. "Found something in Cassandra's past you need to see immediately. She's been married 3 times, not once as her official biography claims. 3 marriages." Maxwell stopped pacing. "Before you, she was Cassandra Westfield, then Cassandra Lindholm. Her first marriage at 22 lasted 14 months before her husband died of sudden heart failure. Second marriage ended after 2 years when her husband suffered catastrophic liver complications. Both men were significantly wealthy." Maxwell and Layla exchanged looks of dawning comprehension. "She's done this before," Layla whispered. "This isn't her first poisoning." "Find everything," Maxwell instructed the investigator. "Medical records, financial transfers after deaths, any connections to Meridian Pharmaceutical. And locate anyone who might have suspected something at the time." Already on it, there's a former medical examiner who raised questions about the second husband's death. He was suddenly retired with a generous package shortly after. Within 4 hours, damning evidence arrived via encrypted channels. Tissue samples from Cassandra's second husband had been preserved, showing trace thallium compounds similar to those found in Maxwell's system. The medical examiner who preserved them had been systematically discredited and threatened into silence. "This changes everything," Layla said, organizing the new evidence. "We're not dealing with an opportunistic murder attempt. This is a pattern spanning decades." Meanwhile, Cassandra's reward announcement worked exactly as intended. Security alerts triggered on their perimeter system. Their location had been compromised by a local shopkeeper recognizing Maxwell from news coverage. "We have company," Maxwell announced, checking security feeds showing 3 vehicles approaching the safehouse perimeter. Layla initiated emergency protocols, transferring their evidence to encrypted cloud storage while wiping local devices. Bounty hunters or Cassandra's professionals? "Both," Maxwell replied grimly as the security feed showed a mix of local opportunists and 2 men with military precision checking weapons. "We have 4 minutes before they breach the eastern perimeter." Their escape route had been prepared for exactly this contingency. A maintenance tunnel connecting to neighboring property, followed by a secondary vehicle hidden in an abandoned barn half a mile away. As they moved through the tunnel, Maxwell's phone vibrated with notification that security measures had been triggered at Layla's grandmother's care facility. "They're using a 2-pronged approach," he realized, "flushing us out here while simultaneously targeting your family." Layla's composed facade faltered momentarily. "The facility has enhanced security, but if Cassandra hired professionals, my team is already mobilizing," Maxwell assured her, making the call to deploy additional protection to her grandmother. "This is acceleration, not defeat. Cassandra's growing desperate." "We need to accelerate our timeline," Maxwell decided, as they switched to a backup vehicle on a rural back road. "Take the battle directly to her before she can eliminate more evidence or witnesses." Layla produced a small flash drive from her pocket. "Then we use this. I've compiled everything. The medical examiner's original notes, chemical analysis comparing the compounds in your system to those found in her second husband, financial trails showing how she liquidated both previous husbands' assets through the same offshore structures she's using now." "The devil's own archive," Maxwell said grimly. "Evidence of serial murder spanning years." They relocated to a different safe house, a modest cabin in western Massachusetts, registered to one of Layla's former colleagues from her research days. Using specialized equipment to mask their digital footprint, they prepared comprehensive files for both federal authorities and select investigative journalists known for their integrity. "Once we release this, there's no turning back," Maxwell noted as they finalized the evidence packages. "Cassandra will know exactly who provided this information." "She already wants us eliminated," Layla pointed out. "At least this way, her secrets become public knowledge, even if we don't survive her retaliation." Their eyes met, the unspoken possibility hanging between them that this battle might claim their lives, even in victory. Without words, Maxwell reached for her hand, the touch conveying what neither was ready to articulate. At midnight, they simultaneously released everything to the FBI, DEA, 3 trusted journalists, and the Medical Licensing Board. By dawn, breaking news alerts announced arrest warrants for Cassandra and 6 Meridian Pharmaceutical executives on charges ranging from attempted murder to fraud and criminal conspiracy. Richard, predictably, had already turned state's witness in exchange for immunity, providing additional testimony that corroborated their evidence. "It's working," Layla said cautiously, watching helicopter footage of federal agents raiding Cassandra's mansion. "But it's not over." "Someone with her resources always has contingency plans," Maxwell agreed. "Until she's in custody, we remain at maximum risk." Their secure phone chimed with an urgent alert from Maxwell's security team. Unusual temperature readings detected in the safe house's foundation, suggesting planted explosives activated by remote detonation. "Out! Now!" Maxwell grabbed Layla's arm, pulling her toward the door as the first tremor shook the building. Cassandra's final desperate move became clear. If she couldn't have Maxwell's empire, no one would. The ground shook violently as they raced from the cabin. Behind them, the safe house erupted in flames, the explosion illuminating the pre-dawn forest as they dove for cover behind their vehicle. In the orange glow of destruction, Maxwell pulled Layla close, both of them breathing heavily as debris rained around them. Cassandra had just elevated their private war to its most dangerous phase. She now had nothing left to lose. Chapter 9. Midnight Reckoning. The explosion made national news within hours. Assassination attempt on billionaire whistleblower dominated headlines as footage of the burning safe house played on every network. Cassandra's desperation had transformed a private vendetta into a public spectacle. The attempted murder of Maxwell Harrington now impossible to dismiss as mental illness or manipulation. In a luxury hotel suite secured under false identities, Maxwell and Layla watched the coverage with grim satisfaction. FBI agents surrounded every property connected to Cassandra, while financial regulators froze accounts linked to her and Meridian Pharmaceutical. "She's gone underground," Layla noted, scanning intelligence reports from Maxwell's security team. Private airstrip in Vermont shows an unregistered flight departed 3 hours before the explosion. Destination unknown. "She won't flee the country yet," Maxwell predicted, wincing slightly as he applied fresh bandages to injuries sustained in their narrow escape. "Not without accessing her emergency funds, which we've identified and monitored," Layla finished, their thoughts now moving in parallel after weeks of partnership. The trap is set. Their strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than hiding from Cassandra, they would make themselves available as bait under controlled circumstances, drawing her into a situation where federal authorities could intercept her. The location: Layla's grandmother's care facility, where enhanced but invisible security measures had been implemented. "She'll assume we've moved your grandmother to safety," Maxwell reasoned, "that we'd never risk her as a pawn in this game." "Which makes it the perfect location to draw Cassandra out," Layla agreed. "Her psychological profile suggests she targets what her opponents value most. She believes hurting your former employee's family is the most direct path to hurting you." The psychological assessment proved accurate. By nightfall, surveillance identified 2 of Cassandra's hired operatives conducting reconnaissance at the care facility. Maxwell's security team tracked them while federal agents positioned for interception. "She's coming personally," Maxwell's head of security reported via encrypted channel. "Black sedan approaching from the North Access Road. Facial recognition confirms it's Cassandra driving, not a decoy." The pieces were in place for the final confrontation. Maxwell and Layla entered the care facility through a service entrance, taking position in a secured room adjacent to Layla's grandmother's quarters, which now contained only a sophisticated medical dummy beneath blankets. Federal agents disguised as staff patrolled the corridors, while snipers positioned on surrounding rooftops. "Remember, we need her alive and talking," the FBI tactical commander reminded them through their earpieces. "Her testimony is critical to dismantling the entire Meridian operation." At midnight exactly, security cameras captured Cassandra entering the facility using an access card cloned from an employee's credentials. Gone was the polished socialite who had charmed Boston's elite. In her place moved a predator in tactical clothing, a silenced pistol visible in her hand. "She's heading directly to room 307, reported surveillance. "Elevator access granted." Maxwell's expression hardened as they watched Cassandra's approach on the security feed. "She's not here just to threaten your grandmother. She intends to eliminate her immediately." As expected, Layla replied, though her composed exterior couldn't completely hide her visceral reaction to watching someone methodically approach her only family member's supposed location with intent to kill. Maxwell reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "This ends tonight." Cassandra moved with surprising efficiency for someone who had portrayed herself as merely a socialite. She disabled a security camera in the hallway, checked corners with practiced precision, and approached room 307 with the confidence of someone who had committed violence before and expected to do so again. The moment she entered the room, the trap was sprung. Lights illuminated to full brightness as federal agents announced themselves from concealed positions. What should have been a smooth arrest suddenly spiraled into chaos as Cassandra revealed a final, desperate contingency. "Chemical dispersal system detected," came the urgent alert through their earpieces. "Suspect has a pressurized device containing unknown compound." The tactical team hesitated, weapons trained on Cassandra as she backed toward the window. In her hand, a small atomizer connected to a reservoir beneath her clothing. "Thallium aerosolized with dimethyl sulfoxide," she explained with clinical detachment. "Instantly absorbed through skin, fatal within hours, and this device will release enough to contaminate the entire floor. Poetic, isn't it? I spent months creating the perfect delivery system while you hunted for poison in your food." The threat aligned perfectly with her established methods, sophisticated toxicology applied with calculated precision. "I'm leaving with Layla Monroe," she continued calmly, "or everyone here experiences exactly what I've specialized in for years." "Evacuate the facility," ordered the FBI commander. "All personnel initiate Protocol Omega, medical staff priority evacuation." As patients were quietly moved from the building, a tense standoff developed. Cassandra demanded a helicopter on the roof and safe passage in exchange for not detonating the explosives that would kill dozens of elderly patients and staff. "She's bluffing," Maxwell said over the secure channel. "The explosives are real, but she won't die for this. Self-preservation is her core trait." "Agreed," replied the FBI negotiator, "but we can't risk calling that bluff with civilians still in the building." As evacuation continued below, Maxwell made a decision that Layla immediately recognized in his eyes. "No," she said firmly. "Whatever you're thinking, no." "She wants confrontation," he replied quietly. "A final reckoning between us. I'm giving her exactly what she wants, under terms that protect everyone else." Before Layla could stop him, Maxwell opened the door to the hallway, stepping into Cassandra's line of sight with hands raised. "I'm the one you want," he called. "Let the agents evacuate the remaining patients, and you can have me as your hostage instead." Cassandra's laugh held no humor. "The conquering hero offers himself as sacrifice? How predictable, Maxwell." "Not sacrifice," he corrected, moving slowly closer. "Negotiation. You're a businesswoman after all, and right now your only commodity is threat. I'm offering you a more valuable alternative." "Maxwell, stand down," the FBI commander ordered through the earpiece, which Maxwell subtly removed and dropped to the floor. Cassandra studied him with calculating eyes. "You've destroyed everything I built. My reputation, my freedom, my future." "You did that yourself when you chose murder as a business strategy," Maxwell replied calmly. "3 husbands, Cassandra? Did you feel anything when they died, or was it merely accounting?" Something flickered in Cassandra's expression, perhaps the first genuine emotion she'd displayed. "You understand nothing of necessity." "I understand choosing survival," he countered, now close enough to see the desperation beneath her controlled exterior. "Which is why I know you won't detonate that explosive. You've never been willing to die for anything." Their psychological warfare balanced on a knife's edge. Maxwell betting his life on his assessment of a woman who had systematically poisoned him for months. In the surveillance room, Layla watched with growing horror as Maxwell deliberately placed himself within Cassandra's reach. When Cassandra gestured with her weapon for Maxwell to turn around, presumably to use him as a shield, Layla made her own decision. Slipping into the hallway through a service entrance, she circled behind the standoff, unseen by either participant. As Cassandra pressed her weapon against Maxwell's back, Layla emerged silently behind her. "You forget who else has stakes in this game," Layla said quietly. Cassandra spun, momentarily distracted, the critical second Maxwell needed. With practiced precision from years of martial arts training, he disarmed Cassandra in a single fluid movement, the weapon clattering to the floor as FBI tactical swept in. The dead man's switch, designed for psychological impact rather than actual function, was quickly secured by the bomb disposal unit. As federal agents took Cassandra into custody, the mask of sophistication fell away completely, revealing the cold-blooded killer who had operated beneath society's notice for decades. "This changes nothing," Cassandra spat as agents secured her wrists. "People like you always underestimate what money can accomplish, even from prison. This isn't over." "Actually, it is," replied the lead federal agent. "Your associate Richard has provided comprehensive testimony about your previous murders in exchange for consideration in his sentencing. Combined with the evidence we've gathered, you're looking at multiple life sentences without possibility of parole." As Cassandra was led away, the adrenaline that had sustained Maxwell and Layla finally ebbed, leaving them exhausted but alive in the now quiet hallway. "That," Layla said with forced steadiness, "was the stupidest risk I've ever witnessed." "Calculated," Maxwell corrected, though the slight tremor in his hand revealed the toll of the confrontation. "She was never going to detonate with herself in the blast radius." "You couldn't know that for certain," Layla argued, the professional distance between them completely dissolved in the aftermath of crisis. "I knew her," he replied simply. "After months of her poison in my system, I understood exactly who Cassandra is at her core, and she is, above all things, a survivor." Emergency lights cast everything in surreal red glow as authorities secured the scene. In this strange illumination, Maxwell studied Layla's face with new clarity, the woman who had saved his life repeatedly, who had risked everything to expose corruption beyond just his attempted murder. "It's over," he said quietly. "Cassandra, Richard, Meridian, all of it exposed." "Not quite everything," Layla replied. "Your company, your reputation, your life, rebuilding begins tomorrow." The unspoken question hung between them. What role, if any, would each play in the other's future now that survival no longer required their alliance? Before either could address it, federal agents approached for their official statements, the machinery of justice continuing its inexorable process. As dawn broke over the horizon, Cassandra's reign of calculated murder finally ended, while something new and undefined began between the unlikely allies who had brought her down. The 48 hours following Cassandra's arrest moved at dizzying speed. Federal agents secured every property connected to the Harrington estate, while forensic accountants descended on financial records. Meanwhile, Maxwell and Layla worked with prosecutors to organize the mountain of evidence they'd accumulated. "The U.S. attorney wants to move quickly with the preliminary hearing," explained Elena Vasquez, the lead prosecutor, during a secure meeting at the federal building. "We have a rare opportunity with multiple forms of evidence, chemical analysis, financial records, recorded statements, and the preserved samples from her previous husband." "How strong is the case?" Maxwell asked, his arm lightly touching Layla's, their physical connection now established even in professional settings. "Among the strongest poisoning cases I've seen in 20 years of prosecution," Elena confirmed. The multi-jurisdictional task force is coordinating to handle both the attempted murder charges and the pharmaceutical fraud aspects simultaneously. The pharmaceutical angle had exploded beyond their initial expectations. When federal agents searched Cassandra's cousin's home at Meridian, they discovered internal documents detailing a decade of falsified safety data affecting dozens of medications. 3 whistleblowers previously silenced through legal intimidation had come forward after news of Layla's vindication broke. That evening, in the privacy of the high-security hotel suite where they temporarily resided, Maxwell and Layla processed the rapidly evolving situation. "How are you managing?" Layla asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders as he reviewed prosecution documents. "Balancing multiple fronts," he admitted. "The board is in chaos with both Richard and me absent. Cassandra's dementia claims still circulate despite her arrest, and the Elysium merger hangs in limbo." Layla approached, her clinical detachment giving way to the gentle intimacy that had been building between them. "The company can wait," she said, taking the documents from his hands. "You've just survived months of poisoning and a direct confrontation with your would-be murderer." When he looked up at her, the composed billionaire momentarily vanished, revealing the man beneath the empire. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't noticed that first tremor," he said quietly. "But I did," she replied simply, her hand finding his in the gesture that had become their unspoken language. The preliminary hearing was scheduled with unprecedented speed, both due to the high-profile nature of the case and the prosecutor's concern about potential tampering with witnesses or evidence. As dawn broke, on the day they would face Cassandra in court, Maxwell stood at the hotel window, watching the city awaken below. "Ready?" Layla asked, joining him in a tailored suit that transformed her from former household staff to poised professional. "For this?" "Yes." He turned to face her fully. "For what comes after? That's more complicated." The question of their future, both individually and potentially together, remained deliberately unaddressed as they focused on the immediate battle. But as they prepared to enter the courtroom where Boston's elite would witness Cassandra's fall, Maxwell took Layla's hand one final time in private. "Whatever happens in there," he said with quiet intensity, "know that meeting you, even under these circumstances, has been the most consequential event of my life." Her response was equally measured yet profound. "Then let's make certain it wasn't for nothing." Together they stepped toward the courtroom doors, ready to transform their private battle into public justice. Chapter 10. Serpents and Ladders. The courtroom fell silent as Cassandra entered in prison orange, her elegant poise incongruous with the shackles at her wrists and ankles. 6 weeks had passed since her arrest, transforming the society darling into America's most notorious Black Widow. Maxwell sat in the front row beside Layla, both dressed in understated business attire that belied their status as the case's central figures. The preliminary hearing had drawn international media attention, cameras banned inside, but journalists filling every available seat. "Prosecution calls Maxwell Harrington," announced District Attorney Elena Vasquez. On the stand, Maxwell delivered devastating testimony, describing his systematic poisoning with clinical precision. Medical records projected on screens showed thallium's progression through his system. When questioned about motive, his answer silenced the room. "My wife attempted to murder me because I planned to merge with Elysium Pharmaceutical, which would have exposed Meridian's falsified safety data and her family's corrupt practices." During cross-examination, Cassandra's attorney attempted to revive the dementia narrative. Maxwell's calm recitation of complex financial details and perfect recall of dates decimated this strategy. "Mr. Harrington," the defense attorney asked with practiced sympathy, "isn't it possible your perceptions were affected by the very symptoms you claim were poisoning?" The thallium in my system wasn't a perception, Maxwell replied evenly. Neither was the identical compound found in my water glass, nor the matching substances found preserved in tissue samples from Cassandra's second husband. When Layla took the stand next, Cassandra's expression hardened to pure hatred. The prosecution established Layla's credentials in toxicology research, systematically rebuilding the reputation Meridian had attempted to destroy. Ms. Monroe, why did you suspect poisoning specifically? Asked the DA. The symptom progression was consistent with heavy metal toxicity. As a researcher specialized in pharmaceutical compounds, I recognized the pattern immediately. The defense attorney approached with practiced aggression. Isn't it true you had a vendetta against Meridian Pharmaceutical before ever meeting Mr. Harrington? I had concerns about their falsified safety data, Layla corrected calmly, which has now been confirmed by federal investigators and multiple whistleblowers. The hearing's most dramatic moment came when Richard testified against his former lover and accomplice. When he entered the courtroom, his typical arrogant demeanor had collapsed into haunted anxiety. Did you have concerns about Ms. Westfield Harrington's plans? The prosecutor asked. Richard's composure fractured. I told myself it was just business strategy at first. Then she explained her previous husbands, how she'd perfected the dosage timing to maximize asset transfer opportunities. She kept detailed journals documenting their symptoms. When did you realize you were participating in murder? When she showed me the special compound her cousin at Meridian developed. Richard couldn't meet Cassandra's glacial stare. She said, if I ever considered betraying her, she had contingency doses prepared for me too. She'd practiced on 2 husbands already. She called it almost elegant, how gradual poisoning allowed her to move assets while playing the devoted wife. And what was your role in Meridian Pharmaceuticals' activities? I falsified regulatory filings connecting Harrington Investments to Meridian subsidiaries. Cassandra's family needed Maxwell's company to maintain distance from their pharmaceutical operations, especially after researchers like Ms. Monroe began questioning their data. The connection between the attempted murder and the pharmaceutical corruption finally became explicit, tying together the personal and corporate crimes into a single conspiracy. By day's end, Cassandra was denied bail and remanded to custody as a flight risk. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Maxwell and Layla as they exited. Will you return to Harrington Global? Are the rumors of your relationship true? What happens to Meridian Pharmaceutical now? Maxwell guided Layla through the chaos with practiced ease, neither answering questions nor hurrying, simply moving with purpose toward the waiting car. Only when the doors closed behind them did he exhale deeply, the performance of composure temporarily abandoned. Well done, Layla said quietly, especially during cross-examination. You were more impressive, he replied. The jury's faces when you explained the chemical signatures, they understood completely. The dynamic between them had evolved into something neither had fully defined. Professional respect had deepened into trust, crisis partnership into genuine connection, yet neither had moved to articulate what might come next. The board meets tomorrow, Maxwell noted, as the car navigated city traffic. They'll vote on whether to proceed with the Elysium merger that Cassandra tried to prevent. And you'll be there as chairman again, Layla said, a statement rather than question. Maxwell studied her profile against the window. Actually, I've been reconsidering my role. Her eyes met his, questioning. Some institutions can't be reformed from within, he explained. Perhaps it's time to build something new instead. Understanding dawned in her expression, not just about his professional future, but the invitation it potentially represented for hers. Before she could respond, his phone chimed with breaking news. The FBI had discovered additional evidence linking Cassandra to a third death before her documented marriages, a college boyfriend whose mysterious hiking accident had left her the beneficiary of a substantial insurance policy. "The pattern started even earlier," Layla observed, reading over his shoulder. Maxwell's expression hardened momentarily. "She'll never see freedom again." As the car arrived at his temporary residence, a modernist penthouse overlooking the harbor, the unspoken question of their future together hung between them. Crisis had forged their alliance, justice had sealed their victory, but what would define their connection now that survival no longer demanded partnership? Inside the private elevator, Maxwell finally broke the silence. "I've been meaning to ask what comes next for you. Your reputation is restored, your research vindicated. Several universities have offered research positions," she acknowledged, "and 2 pharmaceutical startups want me to head their safety protocols division." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, its wall of windows framing the sunset over the harbor. Neither moved immediately to exit. "And if I proposed an alternative?" Maxwell asked quietly, the question carrying weight beyond professional opportunity. Layla turned to face him fully. The careful distance both had maintained finally acknowledged for the artifice it had become. "I would consider it," she replied, her directness matching his, "depending on whether it involved your company or you." With that distinction, everything crystallized between them, the difference between continued professional alliance and something far more personal. Maxwell's hand rose to her face, fingers tracing her cheekbone in a gesture both tentative and inevitable. "Definitely me," he answered, closing the remaining distance between them. Chapter 11. Phoenix Rising. 6 months transformed everything. The trial that captivated the nation ended with Cassandra receiving 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Richard served as key witness, receiving 15 years in a minimum security facility. Meridian Pharmaceuticals' collapse made global headlines. Dozens of executives indicted, falsified drug trials exposed, and over $3 billion allocated to victims of dangerous medications rushed to market through corrupted testing. The pharmaceutical industry underwent the most significant regulatory overhaul in decades, with Layla's testimony before Congress creating new whistleblower protections. 3 other former Meridian researchers, previously silenced like Layla, had their reputations restored and careers rebuilt. The systematic pattern of destroying scientists who questioned data integrity became a Harvard Business School case study on corporate ethics failure. Maxwell watched the final news coverage from his newly completed waterfront home on a private island off the Maine coast. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a dramatic view of waves crashing against rocky shores, the isolation a deliberate choice after months of media scrutiny. "The financial restructuring is complete," Layla announced, joining him with coffee and a tablet displaying complex spreadsheets. Harrington Global has been divided into 3 separate entities, with controlling interest in the pharmaceutical division transferred to the foundation. The transformation of his business empire had been as thorough as the transformation of their relationship. Reclaiming his professional reputation had required strategic precision after Cassandra's dementia claims. Maxwell had undergone extensive cognitive testing at Johns Hopkins, with results published transparently to shareholders. He had appeared at a carefully orchestrated series of financial conferences demonstrating his acumen through complex analyses performed without notes or assistance. Most critically, he had transformed his role, stepping down as CEO to become chairman of the newly formed Harrington Foundation for Medical Ethics, with Layla serving as Director of Research Integrity. The corporate restructuring divested him from direct control while maintaining his influence over ethical direction, a move that business analysts initially questioned but eventually recognized as visionary. "The Elysium merger," he asked, accepting the coffee. "Finalized yesterday. Their research team will operate independently, but with our oversight protocols." She settled beside him on the sofa, professional boundaries long since dissolved. "The whistleblower protection program launches next month." Maxwell's arm circled her shoulders, drawing her closer. "You've accomplished more in 6 months than most manage in a lifetime." "We did," she corrected, the simple pronoun containing the essence of their evolution, from reluctant allies to partners in every sense. Their relationship had developed with the same intensity that characterized everything between them. From the night in the penthouse, when pretense finally fell away, they had moved forward together, rebuilding corporate structures, testifying in trials, and establishing safeguards to prevent similar corruption from taking root again. The intimacy between them carried echoes of their beginning. The same intensity and focus they'd once directed at survival now channeled into creating something neither had expected to find. "Your grandmother's care team called," Maxwell mentioned. "The new treatment protocol is showing significant improvements." Layla's expression softened at the mention of her only family. She asked when we're visiting next. "I think she enjoys the island more than we do." "We'll take the helicopter tomorrow," he decided, fingers tracing patterns along her shoulder. "Weather permitting." The casual domesticity between them remained a source of private wonder. How completely their lives had interwoven after beginning in crisis. The woman who had once served as his household staff now shared his life, her brilliant mind and unflinching integrity becoming essential to his reimagined purpose. A news alert interrupted their moment. Cassandra's appeal had been denied by the federal court. Her final attempt to escape justice had failed, cementing her permanent removal from society. "It's really over," Layla observed, studying Maxwell's reaction. "It was over the moment you noticed the tremor in my hand at that first gala," he replied, the memory now distant enough to reference without darkness. "Everything since has been building something new from those ashes." Rising, Maxwell moved to his desk, retrieving a small box from the drawer. He had planned something more elaborate, but the news of Cassandra's failed appeal created a symmetry too perfect to ignore. "I've been considering timing," he said, returning to where Layla sat, "whether to wait for some arbitrary, perfect moment." Understanding dawned in her expression as he opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band set with a single emerald, deliberately unlike the ostentatious diamond Cassandra had worn. "I don't want to wait any more," Maxwell continued, his customary confidence momentarily yielding to vulnerability. "The past year taught me that time is precious and certainty rare. But I am certain about you, about us." Layla's composed exterior briefly faltered, emotion rising to the surface. "Are you sure? After everything with Cassandra?" "Because of everything," he corrected. "You saved my life, then helped me rebuild it into something meaningful. You never saw me as just wealth or position. You saw me at my weakest, and still chose to stay." Outside, waves crashed against the shore as the proposal hung between them. Not a question of passion, but of partnership already proven through extraordinary circumstances. Layla took the ring from its box, examining it with the same careful attention she'd once given evidence of poisoning. "It's not traditional," she noted, approval in her voice. "Neither are we," Maxwell replied, watching as she slipped it onto her finger without waiting for him to do so. Another small assertion of the equality that defined them. "Yes," she said simply, hand rising to his face in the gesture that had become uniquely theirs. "Though technically, I believe I saved your life on 3 separate occasions, so you remain significantly in my debt." His laugh held the freedom of a man who had faced death and emerged not just alive, but renewed. I look forward to spending a lifetime attempting to even that score. As Maxwell drew her into his arms, the final pieces of their extraordinary story fell into place. The poisoned billionaire and the whistleblower who saved him, now creating a future neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed in a mansion built on secrets and lies. Outside, spring sunshine broke through storm clouds, illuminating the rugged coastline that mirrored their own journey, weathered by violence but emerging stronger, more authentic, and unexpectedly beautiful. Chapter 12. Diamond from Coal. The private island glowed under a full moon, waves crashing against the shore in rhythmic percussion. 1 year to the day since Cassandra's conviction, Maxwell and Layla had transformed the anniversary of justice into a celebration of beginnings. Their wedding surprised society columns, no elaborate ceremony in Boston's oldest cathedral, no parade of wealthy guests. Instead, they chose the clifftop beside their home, witnessed only by Layla's grandmother, Maxwell's closest advisors, and the handful of allies who had stood by them through darkness. Maxwell stood at the bedroom window, bourbon in hand, watching moonlight dance across the water. The day's formalities complete, he had shed his tailored suit for simple black loungewear, the relaxed attire reflecting the private man few ever glimpsed. "Admiring your kingdom?" Layla's voice came from the doorway, rich with affection and something more primal. He turned to find her silhouetted against hallway light, wedding dress replaced by a silk robe that caught silver moonlight along its edges. The transformation stole his breath. The brilliant researcher and corporate powerhouse now deliberately unveiling her most intimate self. "Admiring the view," he corrected, setting down his glass as she approached, which just dramatically improved. Her fingers traced the scar on his forearm, where Richard's letter opener had cut him during their struggle, a permanent reminder of all they had survived. 1 year, she mused, from poison to this. Maxwell's hand caught hers, bringing her palm to his lips. From survival to living, he amended, the simple touch igniting something that had simmered between them all day through ceremonial vows and public faces. "I've been thinking about cycles ending and beginning," Layla said, stepping deliberately into his space. "How completely life can transform when you stop being poisoned, literally or figuratively." Her fingers moved to the buttons of his shirt with deliberate intention. "No more pretense," she murmured. "No more careful distance, no more calculations." The restraint that had characterized their public ceremony dissolved in private. Maxwell's hands found the silk tie of her robe, a question in his eyes that found immediate answer in hers. The delicate barrier fell open, revealing what had been hinted at beneath. Skin warmed by anticipation, curves normally hidden beneath corporate armor. "No more waiting," he agreed, voice rough with desire, as his hands found her waist, lifting her effortlessly. Her legs wrapped around him as he carried her to their bed, the powerful financier and the brilliant scientist reduced to essential need. Their kiss deepened from celebration to consuming fire, hands learning familiar territory with renewed urgency. "I want to erase every memory," Maxwell breathed against her neck, "of every touch that came before you." Layla's response was to push him onto his back, assuming the control that defined her in every arena. Moonlight silvered her skin as she moved above him, the power dynamic between them shifting with delicious fluidity. "Then let me replace them," she answered, pinning his wrists as she claimed his mouth. Their lovemaking transcended physical connection, each touch acknowledging the extraordinary journey from that first gala where she had noticed his poisoned tremor. Fingers intertwined against silk sheets, bodies moving with the perfect synchronicity they had developed first in survival, then in rebuilding an empire, and now in passion. Maxwell rolled them over, his greater strength matched by her tactical precision. "I never thought I'd find this," he confessed against her collarbone. "Trust without calculation, desire without agenda." Her nails traced patterns down his back, marking territory. "I never thought I'd want it," she admitted, arching beneath him, "until poison brought us together." They moved like the waves outside their window, sometimes gentle, sometimes crashing with unstoppable force. The intensity built between them with the same focused determination they brought to everything, the billionaire and the scientist approaching pleasure as they had approached justice, with unwavering commitment to their objective. When release finally claimed them, it carried echoes of every threshold they had crossed together, from employer and employee to allies, from survivors to partners, from logical collaboration to something profound and unquantifiable. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets and each other, the cool Atlantic breeze through open windows caressing heated skin. Layla's head rested on Maxwell's chest, her fingers tracing the barely visible scars left by months of poisoning. "The newspapers called it a fairy tale today," she murmured, amusement in her voice. "Billionaire marries brilliant scientist who saved his life." "Hardly a fairy tale," Maxwell replied, fingers drawing lazy patterns along her spine. "Those rarely involve actual murder attempts and federal investigations." "True," she conceded, shifting to look up at him. "Traditional princesses don't usually have doctorates in toxicology." His laugh rumbled beneath her cheek, the sound of genuine joy that had been so rare before her. "And knights typically don't require chelation therapy." Moonlight painted their intertwined forms as the conversation faded into comfortable silence. Outside, the island stood sentinel against the vast Atlantic, isolated, rugged, and uncompromising, much like the couple themselves. Maxwell's thoughts drifted to the foundation they had built from the ashes of corruption, the whistleblower protection programs, now shielding others who dared expose truth, the research facilities developing safeguards against pharmaceutical fraud. "What are you thinking?" Layla asked, recognizing his expression of strategic contemplation. "That we've transformed poison into purpose," he answered, fingers combing through her hair. "Everything Cassandra intended to destroy became the foundation for something far more valuable." "Diamond from coal," she murmured, invoking their wedding theme, pressure and darkness creating something unbreakable. Maxwell shifted, drawing her fully against him once more, need rekindling between them. "Speaking of pressure and transformation," he said, voice dropping to the tone that never failed to send electricity down her spine. Layla moved to straddle him, silhouetted against moonlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "I believe," she said with scientific precision, "we have several hypotheses still requiring thorough testing." His hands settled at her hips, eyes darkening with renewed desire. "I've always admired your commitment to rigorous research methodology." Their laughter transformed into sighs as they began again, the night stretching before them with the same unlimited potential as their shared future. Beyond the windows, waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, constant yet ever-changing, like the extraordinary bond between two people who had found each other through darkness and emerged into light. As dawn eventually painted the horizon in gold and crimson, they finally succumbed to exhausted sleep, limbs entwined in unconscious affirmation that even in vulnerability they remained unbreakably connected. Two former adversaries of a corrupt system who had discovered in each other not just safety, but passion, purpose, and the rarest treasure of all, truth without condition or calculation. The billionaire and the scientist who had saved him, not a fairy tale, but something far more powerful, a future forged through fire, tested by poison, and ultimately transformed into something neither could have imagined when their extraordinary story began.